Our gospel reading today comes from Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. Listen now for a word from the Lord. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Hey teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have nowhere to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, be merry." But God said to him, "You fool! This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get to eat what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." This is the word of the Lord. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. You've probably heard this line from the Bible before. The NIV is a terrible translation. We should just throw that whole Ecclesiastes translation out. But I didn't catch it before I sent it out to Ken. But it's also probably good for the sermon I'm about to give for us to consider how words can be translated and change meaning. Vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. In the NIV version that Ken read to us a minute ago, it said meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. The Hebrew for this Ecclesiastes passage says Havel Havalim, Amar Kohelet, Havel Havalim, Hachol Ha'avel. The word Havel, you might have figured out if you're really adept at languages, is the word that the NIV translated as meaningless. Havel is the word that the King James and the NRSV translate as vanity. And this word Havel, Havalim, can be understood in a few different ways. Vanity, or vapor, or breath, or ephemeral, or fleeting. It's something which does not last. Things that you cannot grasp, things that are fleeting, ephemeral. It's like the morning fog that gets burned off in the afternoon. If you try to hold it, you can't, and eventually it just disappears. Or those wispy white clouds that sit in between the mountains on the Kenai. You look at those and you think, I could touch that. But you know if you got too close, it would be gone. Vapor of vapors, all is vapor. Ephemerality of ephemeralities, all is ephemeral. Fleetingness of fleetingness, everything is fleeting. Mere breath, merest breath, all is mere breath. My favorite translator of the Hebrew Bible is a guy named Robert Alter. He just released his 3-volume set, if you want all of it. It has his translation and commentary. But the first translation he put out was the Wisdom books. And when I read this required reading in Old Testament in seminary, if I'm going to be honest, I didn't do a lot of the required reading for that class, but I did do this required reading. And it was excellent, and so I wanted to read you his translation of the Ecclesiastes that Ken read. Merest breath, said Kohelet, merest breath. All is mere breath. What gain is there for man in all his toils that he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth endures forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, and to its place it glides. There it rises. It goes to the south and swings round to the north. Round and round goes the wind, and on its round the wind returns. All the rivers go to the sea, and yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers go, they cannot return to go. All things are weary. A man cannot speak. His eye is not sated with seeing, nor his ear filled with hearing. That which is, that which will be, and that which was done is that which will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. There is a thing of which one should say, "See, this is new." It already has been in the eons that were before us. There is no remembrance of it, the first things nor of the last things that will be. They will have no remembrance with those who will be in the later time. Y'all, it's crazy. And it's beautiful. Ephemerality of ephemerality, mere breath, mere breath. There are so many things that we want to hold and control and capture, and we can't. A few words about this word havel. It isn't the first appearance of the word havel. In Hebrew, the letter bet, everybody say that, bet. It's the second letter in the Hebrew alphabet. It's the sound, it's the word from which we get hevel, right? It's the same letter, actually, as bait, but. If you know any Russians, I think they also have interchangeable letter sounds between v and b. Havel is havel, which in English is Abel. Abel, the child of Adam and Eve. Abel, also pronounced Havel, was the second-born son of Adam and Eve, killed by his brother Cain. His life was mere breath, fleeting vapor. It did not last. Abel of Abels, we are all mere short breaths on this earth. Cynical interpreters of the Bible, of the wisdom of Kohelet, this book, Ecclesiastes, they look at this and they say, look, everything is meaningless. There's no point to anything. It's all meaningless. Especially when you're only reading the NIV. Can we just not, let's just agree not to read that version. And you could read this book, Ecclesiastes, and you could say a lot of things are meaningless according to the writer. Seeking pleasure, working, seeking wisdom, rivalry with your brother or neighbor, working hard and depriving yourself of pleasures, trusting in humanity, loving money or seeking abundance, trusting in dreams, trusting in words, laughter, the future. Everything is vanity, everything is meaningless. Let's just give up and go home. And that is technically what the text says. You could read it and get there. But to do so would ignore what the text doesn't say. What's missing from the list of meaningless, vapor, mere breath, ephemeral things. Everything is meaningless, it is true, except God. Vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. Except God. God is missing from this list. If I were going to write a modern take on this passage, I might write something like, nothing is forever and everything is eternal. You cannot capture or hold or control anything or everything for now or forever. I think that's also what this gospel story is getting at, right? Jesus is saying you can store up all the grain you want and you could die tomorrow. You can't actually hold it forever. Another way we might summarize it is this too shall pass. Everything changes. The only thing that you can really count on is that you can't really count on. The more you know you don't know. And then you die. Sometimes we find out that things that we knew were true, in fact, were not true. Sometimes we find out that things that we knew for certain were not as certain as we thought. As the saying goes, there are two things you can count on in life, death and taxes. I would add a third, change. You can count on change, and you can count on the fact that sometimes what you thought was for certain maybe was not. And when you are confronted with this uncertainty or ephemerality or changingness or vaporness of the universe, you have two choices. You can accept it, or you can fight it, right? But here's the funny thing, our response to change does not actually change the change. Your reaction will not change the fact that the world is always changing. Everything will always be becoming new because God is always working on and creating a new creation, a new heaven and a new earth. And we have a choice to fight it or to roll with it. The reality of life is that people do not like change, right? It's part of our inbuilt ability to survive, that we have cause and effect and we predict things, we want to control things, we avoid change, right? And some people especially have trouble accepting this ever-changingness of the universe. We don't like new. We like to know that if you leave a fish carcass in your tent, the bear will come into the tent, okay? Cause and effect, predictability, these things will not change. But the other reality of life, in addition to the fact that if you leave a fish carcass in your tent, the bear will come, is the change itself. So we try to fix things down, and we get obsessive about having something we can hold on to, right? We build bigger and bigger storage facilities for the grain that we have to hold on to so that we can control it and hold it and have it. We store up wealth and treasures and food and money, and in so doing, we store up a false sense of security. We create idols. We make things that we can touch and see, and we convince ourselves that everything is the way we believe it should be. Even Christians do this. Especially Christians do this. We cling to our buildings. We cling to our old hymnals. We cling to our interpretations of the Bible. We cling to the words in the Bible themselves, and we say, this is how things have always been, right? We white knuckle that. But here's the thing. Vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. I read an article last night in the middle of the night that I have to tell you about, and I'm going to send it out in an email, and it's blowing up the internet, and it's going to blow up your life too. Are you ready? Last week there was a conference. It's kind of like a, I don't know, like hippie, folksy, Woodstock in the forest for Christians type deal. I used to go every year and lead a conference piece there, and it's great. It's a little woo-woo for me sometimes. But they bring in the greatest speakers from the Christian world every year. The year that I led this little conference, I got to hang out with Barbara Brown Taylor. I don't know if any of you know who she is, but she's a big deal. It was awesome. This year, Diane Butler Bass, who's a pretty big deal, a Christian historian, she teaches at Duke, amongst other places, she gave a sermon a week ago. And she talked about a word in the Bible that we've realized very recently, like in the last year, is the wrong word. So I'm going to summarize this for you, and I'm going to send out the article, and I hope you'll read it. Do you guys remember a few weeks ago when my sermon was about Mary and Martha? Okay, right? Mary and Martha, and it said, it was the Luke passage, Jesus went to a certain town, and there he went into the home of Martha. It was Martha's home, right? And this is significant because if Martha owned the home, that's a big deal. He said Mary and Martha. And we assume that this is the same Mary and Martha from the book of John. who are the sisters of Lazarus of Bethany. But what's weird in that passage is that it says they went to a certain town. It doesn't say they went to, he's not going to Bethany, he's actually going in the other direction. He went to a certain town, not Bethany, and Martha owns the home. But guys, in those days, if she had a living brother or a living father, she would not own the home. It would have been Lazarus' home. So we have these two weird stories about Mary and Martha that don't quite make sense with one another, but we tend to ignore that, overlook it, move on. Okay. There was a young woman, I assume she's young, who was living in New York City a few years ago, and she's an Episcopalian, and she'd gone to a garden to pray, and she heard a voice say, "Follow Mary Magdalene." Well, so she said, okay, I'm going to follow Mary Magdalene, and she called her local Episcopalian seminary in New York City, and she asked how she would learn more about Mary Magdalene, and she signed up for a master's in theology degree. Okay, wilder things happen. If you're going to sign up for seminary just because you're curious about a biblical figure, come talk to me. It's kind of a lot. Or do it. So she does this. And for one of her term papers, she got access to a new digitized version of the oldest extant, the oldest existing version of the New Testament we have. And she was looking at this sheet called Papyrus 6. And Papyrus 6 is the oldest existing version of Luke that we have. Okay? She's looking at it on her computer, and she notices something curious. That story about Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus in Bethany, she looks at it and it doesn't say Mary and Martha, it says Mary and Mary. So she zooms in on her, probably her iPhone, honestly, and she sees that someone has written over Mary and Mary and changed it to Mary and Martha. Some things you should know about Greek. In the Greek, Mary is Maria. M-A-R-I-A. They have different names, right? But it's M-A-R-I-A. And in the Greek, Martha would be M-A-R-Th-A. Okay? So someone didn't like maybe the literary weirdness of this sentence and changed it from an iota to a theta in the second appearance of Maria, and changed the text from saying Maria and Maria to Maria and Martha. And then that editor, who we know was from the 400s, 5th century, went through the rest of Papyrus 6 and changed every appearance of Maria to Martha by changing an iota to a theta. It's like when you scribble over a note you screwed up. And then they changed a lot of the hers to his, which you can do easily in Greek. And so you and I have ended up with a Bible that says something different than it said in 400. And this girl, who was a young woman who was doing her master's program and wrote a little paper about it, has now broken the Bible. So now there's all these scholars in Germany who kind of determine the official translations of the Bible, right? Who need to figure out what the heck we're going to do with this. Are we going to make a footnote? I mean, God, can you imagine how long the footnote will need to be to explain this? Or are we going to change the Bible? And then this sermon that I hope you all read talks about how she went back and looked at early theologians before the change was made. They don't talk about Mary and Martha in the book of John. They just talk about Mary. And Mary in the book of John is the first person to realize that Jesus is the Messiah. And there's a question about Mary Magdalene, okay, right? So if this is not Mary from Bethany, but Mary from Magdalene, right? This is not Mary from Bethany, guys. There's two different families in that story we read last week. If we're talking about Mary Magdalene in Luke, you and I all grew up probably assuming that Magdalene was where she was from, right? Mary of Magdalene. But what I didn't know and I learned last night is Magdalene is not really a place, actually. They don't know where Magdalene would have been. But Magdalene is a word that means tower. So what if it really is Mary, just Mary, the tower, the first person to recognize Jesus as the Messiah? Sometimes, things we know, it turns out we don't exactly know. And sometimes we are confronted with moments of change, and we have two choices. We can ignore it. We can put our heads in the sand or try to control it or pretend like it's not happening. And we can keep everything the same as it has always been, right? It has always been Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus. Or we can live into it. We can roll with it. We can change with it and see what new possibilities for interpretation or faith or imagination arise. What new possibilities could it open up if we understood Mary Magdalene to be the first person to recognize Jesus as the Messiah? Mary, the tower. Mary, the tower upon which I will build my church. What would happen? Change is something that we're confronted with everywhere. We know that from Ecclesiastes, right? Every day it happens in our relationships with one another, at home, with our children and our spouses and our siblings and our parents and our friends. Things are always changing. Every day, everything changes. Children grow up. Spouses change and develop new personalities or quirks or irritations. Siblings and friends sometimes grow apart. Parents grow older. These are facts of life. We can try to control the change. We can fight it, or we can live into it and see what new creation God might be making. And the same is true with our church. If you look around at churches, not just ours, but churches around the world, you will see that the church is changing. Does this resonate, seem true with any of you? Congregations are getting smaller and smaller, and as a result, their buildings are getting bigger and emptier. The church is changing. Trinity is no different. You all know this. You can look around and you can see the change. You can look at the balance statements and you can see the challenge. And we can pretend it's not happening. We can put our heads in the sand. We can close our eyes and plug our ears, and we can fight it or ignore it. And we can, if we so choose, get stuck in the way things have always been. That is one option. Or we can live into the change. We as a church can accept that everything is born and dies, and we can work together to reimagine possibilities for the next circle around the sun. We can totally and radically reimagine what this church needs and what our community needs from this church, and we can live into change. My dad was a biology teacher, and he often quipped, "Change or die. Those are your options." It's true for evolution, and it is true for all things. Everything is always dying, and everything is always being reborn, and we can count on that. So this week, I want us all to look. I want you to look inside, look up and down and all around. And I want you to pay attention to the places where your heart says, "But it's always been." I want you to pay attention to the places that you want to control or to hold or to make a bigger barn so that you can keep more of the stuff. Pay attention to the places where you want to store it up or keep it as it is. And then I want you to ask why. And what would happen if I didn't, or if I let go, or if it changed? And then after you've looked at where the places are that you want to hold on, and you've asked yourself, what would happen if I let go? I want you to find out. I want you to find out what happens when you let go. We all have a choice to make when it comes to change. We can fight it, or we can change it and see how it changes the world. Because mere breath, all is mere breath. Amen.